So, as you've just all realised, the webinar is being recorded. So I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm working today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So welcome everybody. I am Helen Ford. I'm the Deputy Ombudsman at EWOV, the Energy and Water Ombudsman New South Wales. Thank you all very much for joining us today at this joint Energy and Water Ombudsman webinar. From EWON, I'm joined by Stephanie Sale, our Manager Governance, and Vanessa Concepcion, our Member Liaison Officer. Can you just wave, Steph and Vanessa? Hi. And I'm going to hand over to each of our presenters to introduce themselves and their team members so you can see who is here from each state. So over to you, James.
Thank you, Helen. I'm James Lawson. I'm the Acting Ombudsman for Energy and Water Ombudsman Victoria. And with me is Javla Fitzgibbon, who's the EWOV's Member Liaison Officer. And we are on Wurundjeri land in Melbourne CBD at the moment. It's great to see a number of Victorian members here today. Thank you all for coming along, and I'll pass over to John.
Thanks, James. I'm John Jones. I'm the General Manager, Assessment, Investigation and Resolution with Energy Water Ombudsman Queensland, and I'm joined today by Sonia Cahill, our Manager Communication and Engagement, and Jeremy Inglis, our Principal Policy Officer. And I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Turrbal and Yagara people, and I'll hand over to Ben.
Thank you, John. My name is Ben McAvenna. I'm the Relationships Manager at the Energy and Water Ombudsman in South Australia, or EWOSA. It's just me from EWOSA today, but I'd like to acknowledge the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, who are the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on today. And over to you, Jerry, I believe.
Hi, everybody. Jerry Hill. I'm a guest here today from AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, and I'm coming to you today from Boonwurrung land. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So you've seen who's going to be talking to you today. But before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. I know we're all well versed in online meetings by now, but just a couple of reminders. Can you just make sure your name and organisation are on display in your little square? Remember, 3 little dots at the top if you aren't there at the moment. Just good for everyone to see who's here and where you're from. Please send your questions through as they occur to you. You can direct questions to the host or everyone if you're happy for all the audience to see your question. We'll have ample time at the end for questions, but do send them through as they occur to you. And this recording and the slides will be made available to members after the webinar. We've got over 100 participants coming along today, representing around 45 members. And that's from across all of the sectors. So water, energy retail, energy networks and embedded networks. So why do we offer these webinars and forums to our members? While complaints are clearly a key responsibility for all of our schemes, we do many other functions under our charters or terms of reference. And we each have a responsibility to encourage and provide assistance to our members about the development and maintenance of good complaint handling practices to assist you in the reduction and avoidance of complaints, which is very on topic for what we're talking about today. As I said earlier, this is the first time we've presented a joint webinar to all of our members, and the content we're going to talk about today has been developed collaboratively over the last little while with staff from each of the schemes working together. So today we're going to cover why it's important to promote external dispute resolution, EDR, to your customers. We're going to go through the minimum requirements for energy and water providers, including where the national and Victorian regulations differ. We're then going to talk about what best practice looks like. Then we're delighted that Jerry Hill from AFCA, who you just met, is going to talk about their experience with their members from that different industry sector. And then we'll finish with an outline of what our review and reporting framework is going to look like and what we see as success. and plenty of time for questions at the end. So why are we looking at this particular topic now? It's actually been on our radar for a long time. At E1, we completed an audit of members way back in 2016. And the results back then indicated that while many members had complaints policies and information on their websites, it was often very hard to find and it wasn't consistent. In addition, in 2019, our independent review report recommended we work with our members to better promote complaint systems. James and John, I'm going to get you now to share why this initiative is important to you and what you found when you reviewed your members and what they were doing in this space. Can I start with you, James?
Thank you. EWOV's first edition of our Systemic Issues Report, Detect, in May 2021, looked at the issue of whether retailers were adequately promoting EWOV services to customers, including through their websites. Following analysis of customer service responses, EWOV found that a large proportion of their members were not referring customers to EWOV when the customer indicated they were not satisfied with the member handling of their complaint. EWOV also conducted an audit of some member websites. 2 websites contained no information about EWOV, and several others failed to meet best practice standards and did not provide clear, accessible, and readily understandable information about EWOV. John.
Thank you, James. At EWOQ, we complete an annual compliance audit of members. From these audits, we find a high rate of members meet the minimum requirements to make customers aware of EWOQ. Our most recent audit in 2021 found almost all members were compliant with minimum requirements, which is really great, but we still identified some issues with visibility and accessibility of information, such as no designated web page for information on complaints, including the details for the EWOs. EWOQ's details were only available in downloadable policies and procedures, having to use multiple options in the search function, as a search for Ombudsman often showed no results, and incorrect data details for EWOQ. Our audit also includes a review of disconnection warning notices issued by energy retailers, which has generally found all relevant members were compliant. Last year, we started reviewing supply restriction notices for water retailers and distributors. The South East Queensland Water and Wastewater Code requires that EWOQ's contact details are included on the notice. We found the majority of water retailer distributors in South East Queensland did not issue supply restriction notices, and where that did occur, we have ensured through discussions with those businesses that the requirements of the code have been complied with. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, James and John. In addition to what they've both shared, there were a couple of other factors that contributed to us deciding to launch this initiative. One was the release of the revised complaint handling standard in March this year, and each of our ombudsmen played a significant role in the review of that standard, most notably the role of Jane Perez as chair of the committee, and many of you will know Jane is the ombudsman at EWOQ. The other factor was hearing from our ombudsman colleagues in finance following ASIC's release of RG 271 as a result of the Banking Royal Commission and the focus of ASIC and AFCA on that really important consumer safeguard. So to start off, we're going to just take you through the minimum requirements that are set out in the National Energy Customer Framework and the minimum requirements for water and networks as well. And I'm going to hand over to Ben from EWOSA to take you through those requirements. Over to you, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. So I'm just going to, as you mentioned, touch briefly on the related requirements, firstly under NECF. Now, 2 of the main documents under NECF are the National Energy Retail Law and the National Energy Retail Rules. There's a couple of references in both of those documents that relate to obligations on providers around complaints and complaint handling processes. So firstly, under the National Energy Retail Law, there's 2 sections, 81 and 82. Section 81 is regarding standard complaints and dispute resolution procedures. And in summary, this particular section sets out that every retailer and distributor must develop and publish on its website a set of procedures which details how it will handle small customer complaints and disputes. It's also a requirement for those procedures to be what's referred to as substantially consistent with the Australian standard for complaint handling in organisations. Section 82 of the National Energy Retail Law is regarding complaints made to retailers or distributors for internal resolution. Now, there's 5 clauses under that particular section, but it does advise that firstly, a small customer can make a complaint to a retailer or a distributor, that you must deal with the complaint as per your complaint handling processes and timeframes, that you must inform the customer of the outcome and the reasons for the decision that was made, and importantly, that you must inform the customer that if they're not satisfied with the outcome, that they can take their complaint to an Energy Ombudsman, and you do actually need to provide them with the contact details for the Energy Ombudsman too. Now, moving over to the National Energy Retail Rules, Rule 56 is regarding the provision of information to customers. In short, you need to publish on your website a summary of a small customer's obligations, rights, and entitlements, which includes the contact details of the relevant Energy Ombudsman. The information on your website should also include your standard complaints and dispute resolution procedures. Further to that, if a customer does request this sort of information, then you need to either refer them to your website or just simply give the information to them. And if a customer does request a copy of that information, you also need to provide it to them. As mentioned briefly before, and I'm sure as many of you are aware, there are additional rules such as requirements for EDR information to be on disconnection notices. There is also the new AER Better Bills guideline, which will increase the requirements for energy retailers, but all of these are just the minimum requirements. Now, as for exempt sellers, the Australian Energy Regulator has a published document, the Retail Exempt Selling Guideline, which has various applicable conditions for different exempt seller classes, which includes developing procedures for how you'll handle complaints, advising customers in writing at the start of their tenancy of their rights in relation to dispute resolution, including the right to access an Energy Ombudsman scheme, and providing the number and contact details of the Energy Ombudsman. Now, obviously, NECF is the framework for the sale and supply of electricity and gas, but there are also various state-based codes for water entities too. In South Australia, for example, we have the water retail codes, which cover both major and minor retailers. And these are created and maintained by the Essential Services Commission of South Australia. Interestingly, we do find basically almost identical requirements for both networks and water providers licensed under their various state-issued licenses. Helen.
Thank you. Now, we all know the national framework isn't actually quite national, don't we? So I'm going to hand over to James to find out if there's anything different in Victoria.
Yes, thank you, Helen. So the Energy Retail Code of Practice sets out the rules electricity and gas retailers must follow when selling energy to Victorian customers. Under the Code of Practice, energy retailers and exempt sellers are required to promote the availability of EWOV service at numerous key contact points. These include through their call centre staff, specialist complaint teams, mandatory notices, and on their websites. Helen.
Thanks, James. So that's set the scene for the minimum requirements. I'm going to hand over now to John from EWOQ to take us through what we see as best practice. So over to you, John.
Thank you, Helen. The best practice framework has been developed following a detailed analysis of the requirements in our industries, looking back at our previous audits, looking across the Tasman to what they do in New Zealand, and also looking at the requirements in the finance sector. For us, best practice means including information about how customers can access EWOs in all verbal and written communications, such as bills, payment plans, customer hardship and debt recovery, and on all digital platforms, including website, chats, social media, and apps. When you refer to EWOs, you need to explain who we are and what we do. Unfortunately, Ombudsman isn't a commonly understood or regularly used term. In order for customers to understand what we do, you need to make it clear how we can assist, that we are free and independent, and how customers can contact us. As I'm sure you have all experienced, an increasing number of customers interact with us digitally. With this in mind, your website and apps should be easy to understand and navigate for a range of different customers, and should include a dedicated section for complaints and dispute resolution placed in an easy to find location, a search function that directs customers to the correct area when typing the words complaint, dispute, or ombudsman. So in a nutshell, all information on how to lodge a complaint, both verbal and written, should be clear and accessible to all customers. The crucial element here is also staff training. Staff need to be trained in the minimum requirements and best practice, and need to meet these obligations whether they are dealing with a customer on the phone, by email, or on a chat. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. And we deliberately stopped sharing the presentation for a moment there just to see who was concentrating. So good pick up for someone who let us know. Thanks very much, John. I'm just going to ask James if there's anything you'd like to add about some additional things that perhaps members could do to really fully promote EDR.
Thanks, Helen. Just a few little extra things to think about. Develop opportunities during your contact with customers to advise about access to Energy and Water Ombudsman schemes, including in call scripts and in your correspondence. Include information about EWOs on fact sheets and web pages. Refer customers to EWO resources, such as fact sheets and our web pages, and promote membership of EWOV on your social media and advertising.
Thanks, James. So some really practical things for you to do there, but I'm really pleased now to hand over to Jerry Hill, who's here from AFCA, to share with us a different industry perspective and to take us through AFCA's experience of working with their members to really drive promotion of EDR in banking and finance. So over to you, Jerry.
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. And hi, everybody. Lovely to be here today. One of the things I should preface is I actually came from industry. So I was in banking for 30 years and late last year moved over from banking into AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. So I was there at the transition and there at the implementation of RG 271. And so I can really talk to firsthand how our banks in particular were responding across the financial services industry. But really for us, RG 271 helped crystallise two things. One, what a complaint is and how it should be dealt with. And again, as I say, I saw firsthand how we were preparing ourselves in industry to be able to deal with what would be an increase potentially in complaints coming through. As a direct result of RG 271, we've seen two things play out. A change in the percentage of complaints lodged with AFCA that have not previously been through IDR, which tells us there's greater awareness, and an improvement in the resolution rates at our registration and referral stage. I think I've got a couple of slides in here that kind of talk to that specifically. This one here references the total number of complaints that are received at AFCA. Some scary looking numbers in there, absolutely. But it's those middle lines there that hopefully you can all see those that prior to RG 271, so up really through till December, we saw we had a 50-50 split of complaints lodged at IDR versus what we would call post-IDR lodgement. And then through greater awareness, and I can talk to some of that specifically, but through greater awareness, we've now seen those lines diverge, which is actually really pleasing. So we're actually seeing more now coming to us post the IDR referral. My time at banking in particular, I can speak to the great lengths we went to ensure that all of our communication, and in particular, you know, if you think about the period that we've just come out of, or for many of us are still in it in terms of the pandemic, you know, we had a great opportunity to really reinforce the role of AFCA, the accessibility of AFCA in all of our communication, whether it be letters about hardship, letters about payment deferrals. If you can think through that COVID period, there was a lot of consumers that reached out to their banks for assistance. We were touching, in a way, so many of our consumers that it also really amplified our ability to be able to reinforce the role of our IDR function in banking, but also the role of AFCA. The second thing that we saw as a result of RG271 is, and it's on the next slide, thanks, Steph, is the resolution rate. So, and I must say, this isn't necessarily, we haven't seen an improvement across all, but I'll talk to banking, which is where I've come from. We've seen an increase in the volume of disputes that are resolved at the registration and referral stage. So if you think about the complaints that are being lodged to us, we will then provide an opportunity for the industry and for our consumers to resolve those. In banking and finance, which is that first graph, we've actually exceeded our budget for the last probably 18 months. So 60% of complaints that are returned are resolved by the bank. So again, we're seeing some really good engagement there. And again, just talking to my own experience, I can, and you know, not just when I was working in banking, but more recently, you know, our banks in particular responded very well in terms of really resourcing up their IDR team. So they've responded really strongly from both a capability and capacity perspective. But one of the things that we also use as a really key kind of tool for us is regular member engagement. And I can't really speak to your industry as to how often that happens, but you know, for us, certainly in banking, but also in insurance, in superannuation, in life insurance and investments and advice, we have regular member engagement. And we also have the benefit of using some industry bodies to really help reinforce the message. We work quite closely with the Australian Banking Association, so ABA, to also help reinforce the messages, the role of AFCA. We recently ran a webinar that the ABA coordinated for us. We had 70 different banks log into that, and we use that as an opportunity to reinforce the role of AFCA, but also reinforce the expectations that we have on members. So there's a couple of key things that we've seen as a result. Happy to hang around for Q&A as well, Helen, because there may be some questions, but also happy to talk about anything else from a best practice perspective. So thanks, Helen.
That's great, Jerry, and thank you so much for staying for the Q&A, because I do think our members may well have questions for you. And I think for me, what was particularly insightful, what you shared there, was the benefits for IDR and really making sure that members are promoting your own IDR as well as EDR. Thank you. So I'm going to turn to Ben now, and Ben's going to outline the next steps in this joint initiative. So over to you, Ben.
Thank you. So look, we hope ultimately that from the brochure that previously went around and from the information presented today, that many of our members will be proactive and be able to quickly identify ways in which things can be improved. With that in mind, and to assist, we will provide access to our logos, our branding guidelines, and suggested wording if needed. But going forward, our plans from here are fairly simple. In the next month, we'll jointly develop an audit tool and a review plan. Before the end of the year, we'll commence our review of members' promotion of EDR. And as we work through this, we will reach out to work with you. So it is an excellent opportunity to make sure that everything is up to date. Along the way, we'll keep our respective regulators and government up to date with how things are progressing and look for opportunities to partner with regulators and improve member engagement. Then in April next year, which will be 12 months after the initial launch of it, we plan to report on how the promotion is tracking, and we hope to highlight the success of the project through some stats and stories of our work over the previous 12 months. And we consider that it should ultimately become BAU as we embed the work into our ongoing work plans and engagement with our members.
Thank you. And looking forward, James, what will success look like?
The goals of the project are to increase member awareness of the need to promote external dispute resolution and to drive significant improvement in member promotion of EDR across industries and schemes. We believe that if members confidently promote external dispute resolution, this will help increase trust in the sector more broadly and demonstrate a clear commitment to customers and complaint handling. As Jerry positively outlined, this type of engagement with your customers can actually result in an increase in complaints resolved through your own internal dispute resolution processes. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but we do believe, and AFCA's experience supports this, that actively promoting external dispute resolution as an option will increase your customers' willingness to see through the internal options first. This point is key, so I'm going to say it again. Actively promoting EDR as an option alongside your IDR processes will increase your customers' willingness to see through the internal options first. Helping members to reduce future complaints is a core part of our purpose and our business model. If for no other reason, then the potential to decrease your fees through having more complaints resolved internally and through assisted referrals rather than investigations is surely a good incentive to give this a go. Helen.
Thanks, James. And just a recap of key messages before we move to Q&A. And guess what? I'm going to say it again, that promoting EDR demonstrates your commitment to consumer protections and increases your confidence in IDR. I think if you stand in the shoes of customers, I know I've had the experience of when I've lodged complaints in different settings. If you're told up front where to go if you're not happy with the process that's about to be undertaken, it really does suggest that whoever you're dealing with is very genuine in their commitment to trying to resolve the problem that you have. Also, next key message is really empowering customers by providing the whole picture. Give them details of the EWOS, but also explain our role, tell them how we can assist and make it clear that we're independent and free. Goes to that confidence building part. And tell customers about EDR when they need it. That can be in phone calls with your front line. So really important, going back to that training issue that we talked about earlier, that your staff are trained. So in conversations on the phone, on your website, during online chat, that there's information given about IDR and EDR that you promote on social media and in your publications and communication material. We may return to those messages in questions as well, because they really are the key takeaways that we're hoping you'll think about when you leave the webinar today. So before we go to questions, is there anything any of our presenters would like to add?
Thank you, Helen. It's John James here. I just really wanted to enforce what both yourself and James have just raised. I think we all agree having information on your website about EOAs is important, but it's important also in your interactions with your customers. And we all know that, not all matters can be resolved with your customer. And I think when that occurs, it's really important that you actively advise your customer that they can raise the matter with an EWO and actively provide them with those contact details. Thank you.
Okay, that is the end of us talking for now. Are there any questions? Vanessa, Steph, who are very actively monitoring what's happening, is there anything for us?
I haven't seen any coming in real time, but we called in advance and we had one of our small providers asked, what about small providers? They wanted to make sure that we were going to cover off what small providers had to do. So anything to add about what about small providers? They don't have a website, they said.
Okay. Maybe I'll start that one off and then ask my colleagues to add. At E1, we've actually had quite a lot of very positive experience with small providers, particularly really small ones. So, for example, residential parks, those members often are quite small, frequently don't have a website. We've been really impressed at how they have really thought very practically about what the best way to communicate with their members, their customers and their residents are. We've often had experience where those small members have used our complaint handling template to introduce sometimes a complaints policy for the first time, which is really good news. And they've been really proactive in telling customers through newsletters, notices in their foyers, those really practical things that they realise work. It's also a good plug, I guess, to encourage you to contact each of the schemes you're a member of, because at E1, for example, we do have a complaints handling template, and I think some of our colleagues do. And we produce a poster as well that's really useful for these small providers who have a kind of notice board front entry kind of a setup. So we're very much looking for a proportionate response. If you're a small member and you don't have a website, There will be other ways you can think of communicating. If you're a big member with a very sophisticated website, social media platforms, all the rest, then obviously there's a different set of things that you can do. Anything any of my colleagues would like to add about what you see with your small members?
Helen, I'll just pick that up there. And yeah, very much as you articulated, a common sense approach. If you haven't got a website now, we're not asking you to create one just so you can put EWO's details on them. For us in Victoria, smaller licensed retailers have the same obligation as larger retailers, but in terms of minimum requirements, exempt sellers are required to meet the same obligations as retailers with some exceptions. Having EWO information on websites isn't a minimum requirement because some exempt sellers don't have websites. But if you do have a website, we'd consider it good practice to have our details there. Thanks, Helen.
Could I just add to Helen, it's John Jones again, and we're very early days in our journey with our exempt sellers in Queensland, but for us it's very much for those very small operators. It's very much we're in a period, I guess, in our first 6 months of education and working with them to try to how we can best move these sort of issues forward and with them, and working in conjunction with them to help them to do that.
Yeah. And Ben from EWOSA here too. I'll just add to that. You know, from at our end, for example, we have specifically drafted and printed customer-facing documentation as well. So there might be something that you can put in a foyer or a front office, for example, which sort of sets out what our complaint handling process is and what that looks like as well.
Thanks, Ben. Anything else, Steph? We've got any other questions in advance?
Did you see that one? I don't know. It might have just come to me, but it's will you provide any staff training?
I think we will all nod in unison at that. Yes, I think we will all be looking at updating our induction programs as a starting point to make sure that as we deliver inductions for new members or new staff in existing members, that yes, absolutely, we'll be looking at including training information in inductions.
That's all I've seen so far. Vanessa, have you seen any come through to the host? Sometimes the questions go straight to the host.
No, not at this point, no. But feel free to ask some questions now. Raise your hand if you'd like.
No, perhaps we have managed to cover everything. No, well, we won't make you stay here just for us to keep talking, because as you can tell, we're fairly passionate about this. I think at the heart of it is that it's really practical, and we actually think it really will assist in you dealing with more customers through your IDR process in the way Jerry has explained so well from the banking experience, but also importantly, particularly in the current climate, to really engender more trust in the sector in general and in the ability to reach out for assistance from your customers. If there really aren't any other questions, and I'm not seeing anything, we will be sending a short survey, which we would really appreciate your feedback. We really like feedback and suggestions for improvement. Please send that in, and we look forward to working really constructively with you all over the coming months to really make this initiative a reality and to see some practical changes about how IDR and EDR is promoted to your customers. So thank you very much for attending. And bye-bye, everybody.